first of all, Vince is a very hard act to follow, as you can see. And the title of this, I've used this before, but when I first got involved with Vince, it was about a year ago. Now you have to be very careful when you say, when I first got involved. We're business partners. I entered an entirely new world. I've been in tourism, as you heard yesterday, all my life. And I know that all this stuff is going on outside. But I don't really see it when Vince talks about the Jobs Act and Title III. You know, this is for me a parallel universe. And when I talk about aviation bilaterals and 5th, 6th, and even 10th freedom activities, you know, his eyes glaze over. And I think there's a really important issue here for you as people in the tourism world. What Vince has been talking about is a huge opportunity. And everybody in the end, every sector is going to be jumping for that opportunity. And the people who get in there first are going to have, obviously, the real advantage. And what I'm going to try to show you is that there's some reasons why tourism is really good to be in there first, and actually has an opportunity which other sectors don't really have. Notwithstanding that some of the people who've been investing have thus far said, well, we don't really look too seriously at tourism, or tourism isn't the kind of activity we focused on agriculture, or because the institutions have been focusing that way. And if any of you were not sleeping when I spoke yesterday, you may remember that I was arguing the case that in a world with green growth, sorry, I should have done this before. I mean, these are silos. And over the next 2 or 3 years, those silos, I believe, are going to come together. They're going to come together from a regulatory perspective, which is what we've just been talking about here, but it'll be a cross-border regulatory perspective, so it'll be difficult and complex. People will have different positions, and there's going to be a whole world of misunderstanding as to whether you can actually, as you were saying, Yoko, you were saying, can you do it across borders? I've been working with Vince for a year, and I'm kindly just beginning to understand how that might be done in the context of the United States legislation. But as he said, how that's going to be done in the context of the evolving Italian legislation, which is watching the US legislation, which is today like watching grass grow, if I may say so. I couldn't avoid that. It's going to be something which is popping up all over the place. And again, from your perspective, when you're going back to your countries, you're going to see this happening, and you're going to be confronted with this world of financial services. And it's time to start reading up on that and getting into it, because I actually think this is the game-changing opportunity, and that's what I'm going to try and show you, between all the talk that's gone on the last 20 years about sustainable tourism and delivering to communities, which Chris has been talking about, and of course that's going to go on. But the difference, and this is one of the takeaways that I'm beginning to realize, it's the scalability of it. Chris described the excellent work of Solimar, but how many destinations do you hit in a year? 15. You know, in the globe. 15. How do you get that kind of opportunity opened up to hundreds and thousands and ultimately millions of small communities who could benefit from the trillions of dollars that Vince is talking about? And how do we make sure that tourism gets access to that before all the other people who are going to be lining up? And I think that's what I'm trying to show you. And I'm going to talk about it ultimately in terms of what I call the last 100 meters, which I will explain. I wanted to have a buzzword. Everybody else has a buzzword. The last mile. Vince has got lots of buzzwords. I want to have one. Mine is the last 100 meters. And this is the key to it. the key to it is everybody talks about getting to the base of the pyramid. If you want to have investment in a Marriott hotel somewhere in Africa, or even a Marriott resort, not just Marriott's. Who did we have yesterday? Ritz-Carlton. Those guys know where to get the money from. It's not a problem. But if you've got 20 communities around there who want to have eco-lodges, or they even just want to have a circuit, which you were describing, and I did the same thing in India many years ago. I did a project for the Chief Minister of Rajasthan. And she said, and she came up with a brilliant concept called tourism for all. And she said, if you want to have permission to actually build a hotel in Jaipur, you're going to have to show me how you are going to adopt the villages around, and you're going to make sure that the tourist goes to there, so we don't create ghettos. And the rich people are all coming to your place, and all the others are looking at them, and then in the end you get social unrest, and all of the things that we know are the challenges in our modern world. So that's what it's all about. And this, I wanted to show you this because we had our launch in, you should have brought these videos of what we did in New York. We had a great launch in New York, and here you see Mohammed Yunus. And Mohammed Yunus, who you know, started the Grameen Bank, and all of that investment to the base of the pyramid, thanks to Maria Bello, came in and joined our event in New York and actually talked about how this kind of a concept could now spread around the world, and how the technology that Vince has been developing could actually make a contribution to this in ways that hadn't been possible before. And the other picture there, we had Maurice Strong, and I talked to you yesterday about Maurice, and when these two guys came together who'd done so much to move the world in this direction, I mean, the reaction from the room who were present, it was an incredible moment, and I think we are on the cusp of something which could materially affect the development agenda. Now, my figures are slightly different. Travelism, which we talked about yesterday, is 9% directly, indirectly, and what they call induced of GDP on an average. In some tourism-centric places, Caribbean, it can be 25%. But on an average, it's 9%. It gets 0.1% of official development aid. It's been starved. It's completely under. WTO, by the way, has a project which is led by the Tourism Minister of South Africa at the moment, and that project is basically saying we want a bigger chunk of this. It says it in a nicer way, but basically that's what it's saying. The private funds going, capital investment in the sector is $1 billion, and it's 9 times the public. And that is where the real opportunity is to obviously the officialdom will try to increase that. But if you could increase the private sector side of it, and I think here the figures from the studies that we've been looking at, I think this is a Morgan Stanley study, it says $40 billion today in impact investment. You said 500 from that. The potential. They also say in that same study, the potential could be 1 trillion. So I mean, that's a huge, and I think that was the figure that Vince was referring to. That's a huge opportunity. And that's what it's all about. We have an industry that the UN, the G20, everybody says this could be an industry which creates jobs, and ecotourism is the biggest boom to development. UN Assembly said that at the end of last year. And yet we get this minuscule part of the official development aid, and this is where, if we reposition ourselves, and that's what GATEtrip is hopefully going to help to do. So, let me just remind you, this is what I talked about yesterday. You all remember this? Mm-hmm. Good. This is what we are playing with in our conceptual framework at the moment, and it really is a concept. We've been putting this together for about a year. It's big part now. Vince did a lot of adjusting to get the right formulation. This is a part of GATEtrip, is a part of Gate Global Impact. We've been working on what we call a green growth investment roadmap. I talked again about that. But this is why it's so important. When you're talking about metrics, you can develop things around a global strategy. You can link things to the evolving Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. Nobody's done that yet. Nobody's actually been making those measurements in the tourism sector. If you want to find out what's happening in the development area, you can look at, I think it's the UNDP has the Human Development Report. If you want to find out what the advances are in women's gender equality, UN Women probably has something. And all of these are dissipated, and they're never related to tourism. Tourism has the Global Sustainable Tourism Criteria. Did I get that right? Yeah. Excellent. But it's bottom-up, small-scale, water, waste. It's not related in any significant way, in my experience anyhow, to the big picture of the Millennium Goals. But the impact investors are not looking at how much waste did a hotel use, or even what are the indicators for a community that I know you're all working on gleefully at the moment. They're looking at the Sustainable Development Goal type of issues. And the social issues are at the core of this, the poverty issues, the climate issues, climate impact issues. And we believe the UN Compact is the key. That's why we had the alliance with them. And the Compact has its own principles, which are where business and government and civil society actually come together. We don't do that in tourism. Nobody's actually talking about those kind of issues. And that's where the green growth agenda and the green growth investment roadmap that we talked about yesterday can come into play. And then there's this side of it, which is where GATEtrip comes into play, and that's bringing the travelism sector together. And why is travelism so good for this? And mainly, here are the points. Everybody wants to do it. If you ask 10 years ago, when the Chinese were just beginning to emerge in the world and they did all the surveys, what's the first thing you want to do? I want to travel. It has universal appeal. Our advertising is everywhere. It's been identified as a key development agent. And if you're talking about crowdfunding, it's a crowd-focused activity. Look at what TripAdvisor is doing now about collecting information and putting it up there about likes and dislikes. It's started to look into the environment issues. Think what could happen if TripAdvisor started to look at these kind of issues. And it's cause sensitive. People go and travel and they want to do the voluntourism, they want to do things, particularly the next generation. And when it comes to the metrics, it's internet centric. This is critically important. All of the booking is shifting to the internet. All of that's going to shift to mobile phones. So if you've got a capacity to deal, as Vince said, with metrics, and you can use the internet to get information back, if you can use webcams in locations to actually see what's happening with the project that you're investing in, or even if you can get a special deal on going to those places, I think that's what your tribal group are doing. This is something which you don't get if you're investing in a factory that's making furniture. You get cheap tables, but there's only so many cheap tables in places. Now, yesterday I took you through the pieces that we've put in place in Green Earth. And I'm not going to bore you with it. It's a system. And that system is going to work with GATE, with the technology, to make sure that projects actually do meet the criteria of sustainability. And it's also going to work with Vince to make sure that the projects meet the bankability criteria. You can see when Rebecca spoke before, they're looking for very strict issues. And we will have to be as strict as anybody else if we want to attract the investment. But we have a system in place, and I talk about this as an agglomerator. I go back to what Chris said. You can do 15 things in a year. How do we get 100 companies to come into this system and do 15,000 and ultimately 150,000 of these a year? And you do that by not running to everything yourself, but by creating a framework that people can come into. That framework then has to meet the strict criteria. Vince glossed over this, but Vince is a broker-dealer, has to meet strict security standards. Even if you're investing £1,000, you're a lot more comfortable if you know it's going into a system which is looking at these things in a proper and secure way. Next point, brief. Africa. I'm sure you've seen this map before. If you haven't seen it, look at it carefully. Look at the size of Africa. If you haven't seen it, look at it again. People forget this. People just say, oh, Africa's the poor country, Africa needs development. Africa needs modern tourism, but on a grand scale, not on the scale that it's got it at the moment. We have to stop thinking about small scale for Africa. We have to stop thinking about how do we get a few more flights. They've got to build big airports. They've got to have big airlines moving in there. And they've got to do this in a way that puts the green in as they put the growth in. Because if you don't do that, you're unsustainable from the start. 1 billion people being lifted out of poverty over the next 10, 15 years. 1 billion people in a market. That's the huge potential. And look at that, 100 million outbound Chinese by 2020. Think about that in terms of tourism, and look at the Chinese investment and resource investment at the moment. That's the new potential. And think about this. Look at that. Africa has a beautiful opportunity. It's not tourism related, the energy potential, but tourism flows with the business flows. Large numbers of Chinese now moving with the resource development investment in Africa. They don't like it in America and Europe. Chinese are going to exploit Africa. Forget it. Chinese are going to do the same thing in Africa that Americans are going to do in Africa and that Europeans are going to do in Africa. And Africa is going to become the most attractive place. So now let me close. Why is there an opportunity here that we see with GATEtrip? GATE provides a framework, a big picture framework. GATE brings security, it brings transparency, it brings the technology which allows what I called yesterday, if you remember, smart money to move to smart projects in ways that we've never thought of before. Because before people have said, who do you know who could invest in this? Or shall we have an investment conference, charge everybody $3,000 a go, and you get the rich people to fund the rich projects. But you don't get to the base of the pyramid at all. We have, with Impact Wi-Fi, that's meant to be Impact Wi-Fi, and the Green Growth roadmaps, we have a possibility to bring new things to communities that haven't been brought before. And we have this framework, which Vince so eloquently described, and I so methodically described. Now this is just a start, because you can see that this is tourism, and this is women's issues, and this is Wi-Fi, but you can imagine many other verticals in this framework. But here's the interesting thing. Think about this. Think about if you connect Africa and communities with Impact Wi-Fi, and they can smack broadband 15 kilometers every community, so that you take Kenya and you put broadband all over Kenya. And then you say, well, maybe if we had an eco lodge, 15, 25, 30 rooms in a community, and maybe we could get money to invest in that eco lodge. And maybe it could be a visitor center at the same time. And maybe it could be a place where you do capacity building and training, distance learning. Don has the most fantastic distance learning system here. Why can't you get that into this community? Why can't you have another visitor centre? I'm big on visitor centres. Digital learning, voluntourism and entrepreneurs. I think this was meant to say a place where the NGOs could come together. Your collecting of the 60 groups of people who are out there. I mean, why not be proactive instead of being reactive? Why not do something which is entrepreneurial and not rely on handouts only from the development agencies, that 0.1%. Why not tap into the trillion with this? And that's what we think we are going to do. And that's it. We brought together Gate Global Impact with Green Earth. You've seen these things. We brought the Wi-Fi and we created GATEtrip, and we're doing it with the kind of philosophy that these people have in mind. And we think it's going to push stuff not just from the last mile of communications, but you give people the communications, you give all of the villages internet, you give the kids one laptop per child, and then what do? The kids can't all be social entrepreneurs in the small villages across the world. But if you give them tourism, you can give them a basis for doing something. It's not the only thing, but actually it's the only thing we're here for, so that's why I'm talking. So that's it. Thank you.